The meeting room of the Galactic Council was silent, filled with shadows and tension. A huge hologram floated above the round table, showing a dying planet wrapped in red storms. Its surface cracked like broken glass. Generals, scientists, and diplomats stood frozen, their faces pale under the flickering blue lights. No one wanted to speak, because everyone already knew what the report said. Their last hope was almost gone. At the center of the room stood Commander Lyra Voss, a tall alien woman with silver eyes and battle scars that ran down her cheek. She had led a dozen missions before, and she had never failed. But this one was different. The planet in the hologram was not just another world, it was her home. It was where her family once lived before the enemy came. The same enemy that now ruled half the galaxy. If they lost this final mission, it would mean extinction for her people. An old council member broke the silence at last, his voice trembling. The probability of success is 1%, he said slowly. The plan has a 99% chance of failure. Every word seemed to crush the air in the room. Lyra looked around, hoping someone would argue. Someone would say, "We'll try anyway," but no one did. Most just lowered their heads, afraid. Then, from the dark corner of the chamber, a voice spoke, quiet but firm. "I'll take it." The words came from a human, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a scar over his eyebrow. He stepped forward, his boots echoing on the floor. His expression calm, Commander Lyra turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" she demanded. He smiled just slightly. "Captain Mason Hale, Earth Expeditionary Forces." The aliens whispered among themselves, shocked that a human had been called for such a mission. Humans were rare now. Most lived far from the core worlds, and few ever joined the Council's wars. Lyra folded her arms, her voice cold. "Did you not hear what he said? 99% chance of failure." Mason nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his tone steady. "That's why I'm here." The room fell into another silence. Lyra frowned, thinking he was mocking them. But his face didn't show arrogance, it showed certainty. The kind that came from a person who had seen death many times and walked away each time. The council members whispered again, confused and doubtful. Finally, one of them asked, "Do you even understand what you're volunteering for?" Mason glanced at the hologram. His eyes focused on the red storms twisting around the dying planet. "I understand it's dangerous," he said quietly. "But danger doesn't decide victory. People do." He walked to the table and pointed at the enemy's stronghold shown in the hologram. "This place is built on fear, and fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of dying," he said. "That's why they always win, because we keep calculating what can go wrong instead of what can go right." Lyra felt something stir in her chest, a small spark she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Still, she crossed her arms and said sharply, "And what makes you think you can do what an entire fleet couldn't?" Mason met her gaze, his tone calm but sure. "Because I don't plan to survive," he said simply. "I plan to win," the council murmured louder now, half in fear, half in admiration. Lyra studied him carefully, searching for arrogance or madness, but she saw neither. He looked tired, maybe haunted, but steady, like someone who had already accepted death long ago and was no longer afraid of it. After a long silence, Lyra finally said, "If you're serious, then you'll need a crew." Mason nodded. "I already have one." That surprised her. "Already?" she asked. He smiled again. "Yeah, anyone brave enough to follow a lost cause is welcome." As the council dismissed the meeting, the room filled with murmurs of disbelief. Lyra followed Mason into the corridor, the hum of power conduits vibrating beneath their feet. "You know this mission is suicide," she said quietly. He looked at her, his expression calm. "Every mission is until someone survives it." For the first time, Lyra didn't have a reply. There was something about his confidence that made her chest tighten. It wasn't blind optimism, it was defiance. The kind that made history. Later, as the ships prepared for launch, Lyra watched Mason from a distance. He moved through the hangar with silent focus, checking every weapon, every code, every soldier's armor. The crew watched him too. Some whispering that humans were reckless, others saying maybe he was what they needed. Lyra's second officer leaned close and whispered, "Do you really trust him?" Lyra didn't answer right away. She looked at the man standing beneath the glowing engines, his face lit by blue light. Finally, she said softly, "I don't know if I trust him, but I believe him." As the countdown began and the fleet prepared to jump into the dark, Mason turned and caught her gaze. For a moment, they said nothing. Then he grinned and mouthed the words, "See you on the other side." Lyra didn't realize until then. She was smiling too. For the first time in years, she believed the impossible might actually happen, even if it had a 99% chance of failure. When the fleet departed, the stars stretched into bright silver lines, and the ship's engines hummed like a living heart. Commander Lyra Voss stood on the bridge, her eyes locked on the black screen ahead, feeling the endless weight of space pressing against her chest. This was the moment every soldier feared, the silence after the launch. When doubts were louder than the engines, her crew worked quietly, their movements careful and efficient, but she could feel the tension beneath every breath. Then, she looked at him, the only human aboard the Vanguard, Captain Mason Hale. He stood near the navigation console, his posture calm, hands clasped behind his back. Unlike the others, he didn't fidget, didn't check the screens every second. He simply watched the stars like he had seen them 1,000 times before. There was something strange about him, not just bravery, but peace, as if fear had never lived in him. The crew didn't understand it, and Lyra wasn't sure she did either. Later that night, the crew gathered in the mess hall for their first briefing in deep space. Mason walked in quietly, no fancy uniform, no badges, just a plain black flight suit. Dozens of alien eyes followed him, some curious, others suspicious. He set his tray down, sat among them, and started eating without a word. The silence stretched until one of the younger soldiers, a sharp-tongued pilot with scaled blue skin, finally asked, "So, human captain, what's Earth like?"
"Still full of deserts and war?"
Mason looked up, his fork paused mid-air. "Still full of people trying to make it better," he said simply. The answer silenced the room. Lyra, standing near the corner, watched with interest. Mason didn't raise his voice, didn't try to impress anyone. He spoke softly, but his words carried weight. Later, when the hall emptied, she approached him. "You could have ignored that question," she said. Mason shrugged. "If they're going to follow me into a mission that might kill us all, they deserve to know who I am." Lyra studied him again, this strange human who smiled at failure and didn't seem to understand fear. She couldn't decide if he was foolish or brilliant. The next few days passed in quiet work. They traveled through uncharted space, the stars growing thinner, the signals weaker. Every day, Mason checked the ship's systems by hand, walking the corridors and testing every bolt. It confused the engineers. Why trust his hands when they had scanners? When asked, he just said, "Machines see what they're told to see. Hands don't lie." The aliens didn't understand, but they watched him closely and slowly without meaning to. They started doing the same, double-checking, tightening, verifying everything twice. Lyra noticed it and hid a small smile. Discipline had spread through her crew, not through command but through example. One evening, the stars vanished, replaced by swirling colors and drifting debris. They had reached the edge of the Black Rift, a region of dead signals and lost ships. Lyra's voice was steady as she gave the order, "Prepare for warp entry," but she could feel her hands trembling behind her back. The rift was known for swallowing fleets whole. Ships vanished, communications failed, and strange voices echoed through the comms. Many called it cursed as the crew worked nervously. Mason walked to the viewport and stared into the void. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, colors twisting like fire and smoke. He turned to Lyra and said quietly, "It's not cursed, you know. It's just untraveled." She looked at him sharply. "You sound like you've done this before." He smiled faintly. "Once, long ago. But I came back." The warp engines roared to life. Blue light flooding the bridge, Lyra gave the final command, "Activate the rift drive." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stars tore apart into streaks of color, and everything around them went black. The ship shook violently. Alarms blaring, static filled the comms, and something strange echoed through the speakers. A voice whispering Mason's name. Lyra's blood went cold. "Mason, do you hear that?" she asked. He nodded, his expression calm but tense. "It's just the rift playing tricks," he said. "Ignore it. Stay focused." The temperature dropped, frost forming on the control panels. One of the officers shouted, "Systems failing." Mason grabbed the manual override, hands moving fast. "Reroute power through secondary conduits," he yelled. The crew obeyed, struggling to keep the ship alive as it was pulled through layers of distorted gravity. Lyra could feel her body shaking. Her heart racing, and through it all, Mason never flinched. He moved like a man who had danced with death before. Finally, with one last surge, the engine stabilized, and the ship burst out into clear space. The lights flickered back to life. Oxygen returned, and everyone gasped for air. They had made it through. Lyra turned to Mason, still catching her breath. "How did you know what to do?" she asked softly. He leaned back against the console, sweat on his forehead but calm as ever. "I didn't," he said. "I just didn't want to die yet." For the first time, Lyra laughed, a quiet, shaky laugh of relief. The crew joined her, their fear slowly fading into awe. They looked at Mason differently now, not as a reckless human, but as something rarer, a leader who stayed steady when the universe tried to break apart. As the ship drifted in the silent void beyond the rift, Mason looked out the window again. "See?" he said softly, almost to himself. "Not cursed. Just waiting for someone brave enough to pass through." Lyra turned to him, her voice calm but filled with respect. "You're a strange man, Mason Hale," she said. He smiled at the stars. "Strange enough to survive." The Vanguard floated on the edge of the black rift like a small spark before a storm. Ahead stretched a wall of swirling darkness, a place where space itself looked alive, twisting and breathing. Every legend in the galaxy warned against entering it. Ships that went in never came out. Signals vanished, and strange voices echoed from the void. But now, under the quiet command of a single human, they were going in. Commander Lyra Voss stood beside Mason Hale on the bridge. Her jaw tight, the crew moved nervously, checking instruments that flickered and glitched every few seconds. The rift's gravity fields were already pulling at their ship, like unseen hands dragging them closer. Lyra spoke first, her tone sharp. "All systems ready. Once we enter, there's no going back." Mason didn't answer at once. He just stared into the dark horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "Good. Let's find what's hiding in there." The moment they crossed the boundary, the stars disappeared. The ship plunged into a world of moving shadows and glowing storms that flashed blue and red across the windows. Alarms screamed, lights flickered, and every metal plate on the ship groaned under pressure. The rift wasn't empty, and it was full of energy, bending light, sound, and even thought. Crew members clutched their heads as whispers filled the air, voices that didn't belong to anyone alive. Lyra gritted her teeth, shouting orders to stabilize the ship. But one voice came through the comms clear as day, a voice that froze her blood, Mason. It was a human voice, a woman's, soft, trembling, and unmistakably familiar. Mason froze for half a second, his eyes wide. Lyra looked at him, confused. "Who is that?" He didn't reply, only reached for the comms control and cut the channel. "Focus on navigation," he said, his tone harder now. "The rift is trying to distract us." But Lyra saw the truth in his face. Whoever that voice belonged to, it was someone he had lost long ago. The rift grew darker and the ship began to drift. Gravity twisted in strange directions. Pulling objects sideways, every control panel flickered, showing readings that made no sense. Negative distances. "Looping coordinates," the engineer shouted. "We're losing main engines." Mason rushed to the console, hands flying across the manual controls. "Switch to auxiliary thrusters. Feed power from life support backups." Lyra stared. "That'll burn us out in 20 minutes. Mason looked up, a small grin on his face. "Then let's not take 20. The ship roared forward, slicing through plasma waves and radiation bursts. Outside, they saw shapes, enormous silhouettes drifting through the rift like forgotten giants. Some looked like broken ships, others like living things made of light. The crew stared in silent terror. Lyra whispered, "Are those alive?" Mason didn't blink. "Doesn't matter. Keep your eyes on the exit coordinates." Suddenly, the lights went out completely for a moment. There was only darkness, then faint blue symbols began glowing on the walls. Ancient markings no one had ever seen before. They pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. The scientist on deck gasped, "Commander!" "These aren't random. They're coordinates. I'm in human script." Lyra turned sharply. "Human? That's impossible." Mason's voice was quiet. "No, not impossible. Just forgotten." The rift trembled again. This time with violent force, a shockwave hit the ship, throwing everyone to the ground. Mason grabbed the pilot's seat. Pulling it steady, the engines flared white, the hull shaking like it would tear apart. "Hold it together," he shouted. "We're almost through." Lyra fought to stay upright, her vision blurred by sparks and smoke. Through the chaos, she caught sight of Mason's face, calm, Focused and fearless, it was as if he belonged here, as if the rift itself was testing him. The last barrier came, a massive wall of black energy, rippling like water. If they hit it wrong, the ship would disintegrate. Lyra hesitated. "We'll never make it." Mason's hands tightened on the controls. "Trust me." He angled the ship, diving straight into the light. The ship screamed, metal bending, alarms shrieking, and then silence. Everything went still. Outside, stars reappeared, shining bright and calm. The ship floated in open space once more. Battered but alive, the crew cheered weakly, some crying, some laughing. Lyra sank to her knees in relief, her heart racing. They had crossed the black rift, something no one had ever done before. She turned to Mason, who was staring quietly at the screen. "Are you going to tell me what that voice was?" she asked. He didn't look at her, only said softly, "A memory that never learned to die." Lyra didn't press him. Outside, the stars ahead looked different, brighter, sharper, as if they had never been seen by any living being. She straightened and whispered, "So this is what lies beyond the rift." Mason smiled faintly. "No," he said. "This is just where the real mission begins." When the storm of the Black Rift finally ended, the stars cleared like curtains being drawn back. Silence filled the bridge of the Vanguard, the kind of silence that comes after surviving something no one should. Every system was damaged, lights flickering, panels cracked, and yet they were alive. Commander Lyra Voss slowly rose from her chair, her heartbeat still pounding in her ears. "Report," she ordered, her voice rough. The navigator squinted at the glowing screen, his voice trembling. "We're not in any known sector, Commander. There are no maps here, no signals, no coordinates." Lyra blinked. "Impossible." But then she saw it, a planet hanging in the black, glowing softly like an emerald heart in the middle of the void. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Its surface shimmered with green oceans and silver continents, and clouds swirled in patterns that looked almost deliberate, as if someone had painted it by hand. Mason Hale stood beside her, arms crossed, his calm eyes fixed on the world below. He didn't look surprised, more like he'd been expecting it. Lyra turned to him, frowning. "You've seen this before?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Not with my eyes, but maybe somewhere older than memory." They prepared for descent. The atmosphere glowed blue around the ship, gentle and warm. When the landing gear touched down, it felt like the planet itself sighed, welcoming them. Lyra led the first scouting team, her boots sinking into fine white sand that sparkled like crushed glass. Strange crystal trees rose in the distance, humming softly in the wind. Small winged creatures darted through the air, their wings leaving trails of light behind them. Even the air felt alive. Lyra looked around, whispering, "This place, it's not just alive, it's aware." The scientists began collecting samples, measuring energy fields, taking recordings. Everything they tested came back impossible. Air richer than oxygen, soil charged with radiation that didn't harm, and at the center of a nearby valley stood ruins, enormous and silent. They looked ancient, carved from silver stone, each wall covered in symbols and runes. Lyra touched one of the carvings, brushing away the dust. Her breath caught. She recognized the language, not alien, not unknown. "Human," her voice shook. "Mason, come look at this." He walked closer, his boots echoing softly against the stone. His eyes scanned the carvings, spiral patterns. Human words mixed with alien markings. "Earth Fleet," Lyra whispered, pointing to a faded emblem carved into the wall. Mason froze, his hand hovering over the stone. "This can't be," she said. "Humans didn't have interstellar travel this far back." Mason's eyes darkened. "Not the ones you remember," he said quietly. Lyra turned to him, confused. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt, tracing one of the ancient letters, his fingers trembling slightly. "They were explorers," he said softly. "Long before our wars, before our fall, humans reached further than anyone believed." As the crew moved deeper into the ruins, the lights from their helmets flickered. Strange energy pulsed through the walls, almost like the place was waking up. One of the engineers shouted, "Commander, the ground's reacting to our presence." Lyra turned sharply. "Pull back!" But before they could retreat, the symbols began to glow with golden light, spreading across the walls and floor. A low hum filled the air, rising in pitch until it became a tone, not mechanical but musical. Mason stood still, eyes closed, listening. "It's a welcome signal," he said quietly. "They're recognizing us." Lyra's eyes widened. Recognizing who? He opened his eyes, the golden reflection glowing in them. Humans. Suddenly, the air around them shimmered. The ruins projected holographic images, tall figures in armor that looked both ancient and advanced. They were human, but not exactly. Their eyes glowed faintly, their clothes marked with the same spiral runes on the wall. One image spoke in a soft echo. "If you've come through the rift, you are of our kind." Lyra's throat tightened. "What is this place?" Mason whispered. "Home." The projection showed stars, ships, and something more. A warning. A voice continued. "We left this world behind to protect what was lost. The enemy will seek it again. If you are human, remember, fear is the true enemy." Then the light faded and the ruins went silent again. Lyra turned to Mason, her heart racing. What enemy? What were they protecting? Mason looked toward the sky, his expression grim. "The same one that destroyed your world." A sudden alarm broke the silence. A shrill sound from the vanguard. Lyra grabbed her comm. "Report." The voice on the other end was frantic. "Multiple ships incoming." "Not ours, they just dropped out of warp above the planet." Lyra and Mason locked eyes. He didn't need to say anything, and they both knew who it was. The enemy had followed them through the rift. Lyra turned back toward the ruins, the glowing symbol still faintly pulsing. She whispered, "They knew this would happen, that someone would come here again." Mason checked his rifle and smirked slightly. "Then let's make sure they regret it." The hidden world was no longer a secret. It was a battlefield waiting to wake. The ground trembled before the first explosion reached them. Dust rained down from the ancient ruins as the vanguard's alarm blared through the comms. Lyra Voss raised her head toward the sky and saw them. Dark shapes descending through the clouds, dozens of enemy warships, their hulls burning red like molten scars in the atmosphere. The same fleet that had destroyed her homeworld. They had found them again, even across the rift. "Defensive formation," Lyra shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. Her soldiers scrambled for cover, aiming plasma rifles at the clouds. The sound of the enemy's engines filled the air like thunder. Mason Hale stood beside her, his rifle slung over his shoulder. Eyes calm as always, he watched the descending ships, then smiled faintly. "Guess they missed me." Lyra turned to him, frustration flashing in her eyes. "You think this is a joke?" He met her gaze, unbothered. "No, I just think they picked the wrong world to attack." The first wave hit hard. Explosions tore through the sand as enemy dropships landed, releasing armored soldiers with glowing red visors. Their weapons screamed light and heat. Cutting through the crystal trees, Lyra ducked behind a broken wall. Returning fire, her team fought bravely. But they were outnumbered, 10-1. The enemy moved like machines. Precise and ruthless, Lyra looked to Mason, ready to order a retreat, but he was already moving. He ran straight into the open, dodging blasts with impossible timing. He dropped one soldier, then another, each shot clean and efficient. The crew watching from behind cover could barely believe their eyes. Lyra yelled, "You'll get yourself killed!" He ducked behind debris, reloading with a grin. Not yet. Overhead, the enemy's main ship opened fire, scorching the valley with plasma strikes. The ground melted into rivers of glass. Lyra's comm crackled. "Commander! The vanguard is under heavy fire. We can't hold the sky." She grit her teeth. "Pull back! Get into orbit if you can." The line went dead, static filling her ears. Mason crouched beside her, looking up at the burning sky. "They'll level this whole place if we stay." Lyra nodded. "We can't outrun them, not without the ship." Mason smirked. "Then we don't run." He pulled a small device from his belt, a holographic projection of the ruins layout. He pointed to the center. "Here, there's an energy source beneath this structure. If we trigger it, we might have a chance." Lyra frowned. "You want to use alien tech we barely understand?" He gave a half shrug. "That's kind of my thing." Lyra hesitated, then finally nodded. "Do it. I'll buy you time." The battle raged around them. Lyra led the soldiers in a tight defense, her voice cutting through chaos like steel. They fought between the ancient pillars, using ruins as cover. For every enemy they took down, two more appeared. Still, she refused to fall back. This planet had awakened something deep inside her. For the first time in years, she wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting for meaning meanwhile. Mason descended into the heart of the ruins. The tunnels were narrow and glowing faintly with ancient light. He followed the pulse. A slow, rhythmic vibration that grew stronger with every step. At last, he reached a vast chamber filled with floating crystals and machinery that looked half organic, half metal. In the center hovered a massive core. Its light golden and alive, symbols floated around it, shifting between languages, human, alien, and something older. Mason stared at it, whispering, "You're still here." After all this time, he approached the console. Laying his hand on the surface, the core reacted instantly. Glowing brighter, a voice echoed in his mind, soft and familiar. "You carry the mark of the first." He froze, whispering, "Who are you?" The voice answered, "One who remembers." "You were never meant to forget." Then the core pulsed violently, energy rippling out in golden waves. Above ground, the ruins shook and every wall began to glow with light. Lyra shielded her eyes as the symbols came alive around her. The enemy soldiers stopped firing. Looking around in confusion, the ground beneath them split, and golden pillars rose from the sand, releasing blinding energy. Mason's voice came through the calm and steady. "Lyra, tell your troops to stand down." She hesitated. "What did you do?" He smiled. "I just asked the planet to wake up." The air vibrated like a storm. The enemy's ships tried to pull back, but their engines failed. Trapped by the gravitational field of the awakened core, massive beams of light shot into the sky. Striking the largest enemy ship, it shattered instantly. Breaking into glowing fragments, the others fled, their fleet scattering into the void. Lyra watched in stunned silence as the storm faded. The golden light dimmed, leaving the valley quiet once more. She lowered her weapon, her voice shaking. You just destroyed a fleet with a planet's heartbeat." Mason walked out of the ruins, covered in dust, smiling faintly. "Technically, the planet did it," he said. "I just asked nicely." Lyra laughed, half disbelief, half awe. Then her smile faded as she noticed the look in his eyes. He seemed distant, listening to something only he could hear. "Mason?" she asked softly. "What did that voice say to you?" He turned to her slowly, eyes glowing faintly with golden light. "It said they're coming back," he whispered. And this was only the first wave. The world lay in silence after the storm, its green seas calm again, its glowing forests still, but above the peace, wreckage drifted in orbit. The remains of the enemy fleet Mason Hale had just destroyed using the planet's ancient core. Commander Lyra Voss stood beside him at the edge of the valley, the golden glow of the ruins fading behind them. She could still feel the hum of power beneath her boots, the energy that had answered his call. But she also felt something else, a quiet dread, the kind that comes before something even worse. She looked at Mason, his uniform torn, his hands still faintly shining with golden light. He hadn't spoken since the battle ended, just stared toward the horizon where the sun rose on a sky too bright to be real. "Mason," she said softly, "what did that voice tell you?" He didn't look at her, just whispered, "That this planet was never meant to wake up again." Lyra frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned finally, his eyes tired. "The core wasn't just a weapon. It's a beacon." The words hit her like ice. "A beacon?" she repeated. He nodded slowly. "Something out there heard it. Something worse than the fleet we just fought." Moments later, the ship's alarms began to wail. Lyra ran to the comms, shouting, "Status report!" The technician's voice came through, filled with panic. "Commander, we're detecting a massive distortion outside the system, larger than anything we've ever recorded. It's moving straight toward us." Mason closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. "They're coming!" Lyra grabbed his arm. "We can't fight something like that. Not in our condition." He looked at her with that same steady calm she had come to know. "We won't. We'll distract it." The crew gathered in the command chamber, faces pale, eyes wide with fear. The readings showed a dark mass moving through space like a shadow made of fire, swallowing light itself. Lyra pointed to the data. "If that reaches us, it'll destroy the planet, the ship, everything." Mason nodded. "Which is why we need to lead it away." Her second officer, Sharon, stepped forward, voice trembling. "Lead it away? With what? Our engines are half dead." Mason turned to him, calm but firm. "Not the ship. Me." The room fell silent. Lyra's breath caught. You can't be serious. Mason looked at her, his tone quiet but certain. The core is linked to me now. That thing out there is following the signal. My signal. If I leave orbit and jump far enough, it'll follow me. Lyra shook her head. That's suicide. He smiled faintly. You said that the first time we met. And yet here we are. She glared at him, her voice cracking. This isn't bravery. It's madness. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Lyra, if we stay, everyone dies. But if I leave, maybe someone survives. Maybe this world gets to live. For a moment, the commander who had never feared anything looked broken. She turned away, trying to keep her voice steady. You'll need a ship, Mason nodded. The scout vessel in Bay 2 still works. Lyra closed her eyes, fighting the weight in her chest. I'll have it ready. The crew worked in silence as Mason prepared. He moved through the corridors one last time, touching the cold metal walls. Every corner of the Vanguard felt like home now, a home he would never see again. When he passed the crew, they stood in silence, saluting him without words. Even the ones who once called him reckless now looked at him like he was something more, a legend in the making. Lyra met him at the hangar, her expression unreadable. The small ship waited, engines flickering weakly. She handed him a small silver pendant, the emblem of her people. For luck, she said. He smiled softly. I'll take all I can get. Before boarding, he paused and looked at her. You know, you never told me why you joined this mission, he said. She hesitated, then whispered, because I had nothing left to lose. He nodded slowly. Then live like you've gained everything. The ramp closed and the engines ignited. The small ship rose from the hangar, leaving trails of blue light behind. Lyra ran back to the bridge, eyes locked on the radar. The enemy anomaly had already entered the system, a shadow stretching across stars. Mason's craft is accelerating, the officer reported. Distance increasing, he's drawing it away. Lyra gripped the console, her voice low. Come on, Mason. Keep going. Out in the black, Mason's small ship was dwarfed by the approaching mass. It wasn't a fleet. It was alive, made of shifting shapes and glowing red veins. It reached toward him like claws of smoke. He activated the rift drive, forcing his ship into overdrive, every light flashing red. The hull screamed as it began to tear apart. He didn't flinch, didn't look back. Come on, he whispered. Follow me. As the planet's sensors went dark, Lyra stood silently. The comm crackled once, Mason's voice faint but steady. Tell them humans don't fear impossible odds. We become them. Then the signal vanished. The sky cleared. The anomaly was gone. And for the first time in centuries, the world beyond the rift was safe. Lyra stood by the viewport, watching the stars where Mason had disappeared. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "That's why you were here." Behind her, the ancient core pulsed once more, sending a faint signal into the dark. Somewhere, far beyond the stars, a small light blinked in reply, a heartbeat that refused to die. The stars had never looked so quiet. For days, the Vanguard drifted in orbit around the Emerald Planet, the world that Mason Hale had saved and vanished to protect. Commander Lyra Voss stood on the bridge, her uniform torn and her voice quiet. No one had spoken Mason's name out loud since his last transmission, but everyone felt his presence lingering like a heartbeat in the ship's hull. Outside, the debris of enemy ships glimmered faintly, circling the planet like a graveyard made of light. Engineers worked silently to restore systems. Scientists collected samples from the surface, studying the awakened ruins. But Lyra spent most of her time at the observation deck, staring into the stars, waiting for a signal she knew would never come. Then, on the fifth day, something flickered across the long-range scanners, a pulse, faint, rhythmic, too ordered to be natural. The communications officer frowned. "Commander, we're picking up a signal from deep space." Lyra turned sharply, her heart skipping. Origin? Unknown. But it matches the rift frequency. For a moment the room was completely still, Lyra whispered. Put it through. Static filled the air, then a soft hum. It wasn't a voice at first, just the sound of a machine breathing. Then came words, broken, quiet, but unmistakably human. If you can hear this, then the plan worked. Lyra's knees went weak. It was Mason's voice, rough and distant. He continued, "Don't look for me. The rift took me farther than expected. But I'm alive. For now." The crew froze, listening. "I found something," he said, his tone changing, filled with awe. "There are more of them out here. Human outposts, forgotten colonies. Some still active." Lyra gripped the console, her heart pounding. He wasn't just alive. He had found proof of humanity's oldest secret. The bridge filled with whispers and gasps. The message crackled again, his voice softer this time. "Tell them we were never lost, Lyra. We just stopped looking far enough." Then the signal faded into silence. Lyra stood motionless for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Trace that signal." The officer shook his head. "It's too faint. The rift distortions make it impossible." She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. "Record it," she said quietly. "Archive it under his name." That night she walked alone through the ship's halls. Everywhere she went, the crew nodded to her, not just with respect, but with something new. Hope. Mason's story had already spread. The human who smiled at failure, who defied extinction, who vanished into the unknown. To the soldiers and scientists, he was no longer just a man. He was a legend. And legends don't die. They multiply. Weeks passed. The council finally re-established contact through a distant relay. They demanded a report, proof that the mission had succeeded. Lyra transmitted everything, the battle, the ruins, the message. But she kept one secret for herself, the coordinates Mason had left behind. It was a map, hidden inside his last data burst, points scattered across the galaxy. Each one marked with a single human word, colony. Months later, when repairs were done and the Vanguard was whole again, Lyra gathered her crew in the hangar. Before them floated a projection of the stars, hundreds of glowing dots connected by faint lines. "This," she said, her voice firm, "is where we're going next." One of the pilots frowned. "Commander, are these real?" Lyra smiled slightly. "They will be." She looked out the viewport where the rift shimmered faintly in the distance. "Mason Hale didn't just save a planet," she said. "He reminded us what it means to be human, to face the impossible and go anyway." The crew cheered softly. For the first time since the war began, there was something worth believing in. Lyra turned toward the controls, her hand hovering over the jump command. "Prepare for departure," she said. The engines came alive, humming with quiet power. As the ship ascended, the ancient world below glowed one last time, its golden core pulsing in rhythm with their engines, almost like it was saying goodbye. Before they jumped, Lyra opened her personal log, recording her final message to the council. "This mission began as a failure," she said, "but what we found beyond the rift changes everything." She paused, her eyes softening. "If you ever doubt humanity's purpose among the stars, remember the man who smiled at failure." Then she closed the log and whispered, "Engage warp." The Vanguard vanished into the light, leaving behind the quiet world that had witnessed the rebirth of hope. And far across the void, in the endless dark of the rift, a faint blue flare blinked once. Then again, not a distress call, not a warning, a signal, a promise. Somewhere beyond the reach of maps, Captain Mason Hale was still out there, charting the forgotten edges of human history, carrying with him the legacy of a species that refused to stop fighting. And in every ship that followed, in every explorer who dared to face the impossible, his words would echo forever. Failure is just the universe asking if you're sure.